Hey, everybody, I want to welcome you back to another edition. You got it. Printing's Alive podcast with me, Warren Werbitt. Today, we've got a great guest all the way from down under. We got Kelvin Gage. How you doing, Kelvin?
Hello, buddy. How are you? Good to be here. I have worn my special Print is my love language t-shirt in honour of you and in honour of my relationship with Print. Love your work, buddy. It's a pleasure to be on with you. Coming from Sydney, Australia. I'm coming from the future, buddy.
You're back to the future. I appreciate the t-shirt. I appreciate everybody who buys my t-shirts or hoodies. And if you haven't bought one, go buy one so I could appreciate you too. Let's just jump in here. Got a little monologue to read. Just thought it'd be easier. But so today's conversation is one that a lot of print owners think about, but don't always talk about openly. Building a printing company is personal. Should be personal. It's not just about machines and margins. It should be a little bit more about the margins. It's about the people, the risks, sleepless nights, reinvesting your profits if you have them, chasing payments, buying equipment you probably shouldn't have bought. We know a few people have done that. And then betting on yourself over and over again. And then one day you sell it. And what does it feel like? I want to know, was it planned? Was it emotional? Was it strategic? Was it a relief? Today I've got Kelvin on. I told you, from Australia. He built and sold his print business. It was a family business. He'll tell us a little bit about it. And then we're going to unpack the real story behind the decision. Why would one sell? How do you know when it's the right time? What's the business actually worth? Because conversations I've had with people, we all think our businesses are worth way more than they are, just because we're adding up all the hours we put in from the day we started. What happens to your identity when you're no longer the owner? Bet you haven't thought of that one. Well, if you're a print owner thinking about exiting someday, this episode is for you. Kelvin, welcome again, and let's get at it.
Buddy,
So,
again, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to tell you a real quick story in opening, right? You know, we've become acquaintances over the last couple of years thanks to a meeting at D-Scoop a few years ago, that sort of stuff. But I don't know whether I've told you this story before, but your video going back, when did you make that? When did you make the Pizzazz I Love Print video?
when I had hair.
When you had hair? Well, it's a little while ago.
A while back. Actually, 2008, but I don't want to date myself.
So I stumbled across that somehow, made it all the way to Australia. And, I always prided myself when we were going for a big pitch, a tender, or, I was doing a presentation to customers or something like that, right? I'd try things a little bit different. And it was hard for me to explain just what print meant to me, right? To a customer. For a customer, it's just, mate, you're doing my job, you're doing my books or my brochures, whatever. It's no big deal. I said, well, you don't understand. We bring a passion and a love language to this that means we're going to love you. We're going to treat your job perfectly. I said, I can't say it as clearly as this video can. So I used to play your video in my sales pitches, presentations, tender presentations. So, buddy, I feel like buying a few t-shirts is a little bit like a commission that I probably owe you on helping me land. And I did help me land a few. For the presentation, for the purpose of the presentation, I was trying something a bit different. B, I just couldn't explain better than you. So somebody get onto YouTube, have a bit of a look at what Warren looked like in 2008. But just a cool, funny way of describing just the passion of print and how much it means to some of us crazy people.
So I'm smiling because my cheeks are hurting, but thank you. And what were your revenue back then so we could discuss the commission?
Yeah, it's not that much now, so let's do it on future earnings. So, buddy, I don't know. I'm happy to start with a real quick rundown of my story. I'll keep it quick, although I am in the morning. I know you're in the evening in Toronto and Sydney. I'm in the morning, so I've got all day.
I'm Montreal, by the way, not Toronto. But
Montreal.
Everyone else wishes I was in Toronto, but it's all good. It's all good. Anyways, thank you for those kind words. I'm going to use that clip for my promotional stuff. But perfect. So, really, let's start at the beginning. What kind of print company did you have? What was? I don't know. I'm going to ask.
So it goes back.
Run wild. So, just give me the type of business, the size, niche, digital, whatever it is that you did.
Well, I'll start, if it's all right. I'll go back a couple of steps to that to figure out how I got into print in the first place and a little bit of the journey to end up with the business that we ultimately sold, right? So, grew up very close family, very close to Dad, who went to heaven about 18 months ago. in his early 90s, but we had a fantastic relationship at home. I was studying marketing at university. In Australia, typically you still live at home when you're at university, right? So I was studying marketing. I had a fair bit of spare time on my hand. Dad had this little business called Dominion. It was a little printing business. And we just always knew Dad would, do some letterheads for people, do some business cards for people, do some nice docket books for some of his customers. And it provided the family a very nice, comfortable living. Well, I was spending a fair bit of time bumming around at university, as we do. I had a ute, or a utility truck, that I used to tow a jet ski around in, and I spent all my time on the water. And Dad said, listen, Kel, this is a bit crazy. Why am I paying couriers when I'm also paying a fair few of your expenses at home, and you've got this utility that doesn't do a whole lot of work? Why don't you come and do some deliveries for me? So I did, and I got to know some customers, and I did a bit of work. I got to know the factory, and I'd load up, and I'd learn a little bit about, carbonless paper and BMS colours, and go and pick up ink and paper when needed, that sort of stuff. Now, to put things into context, this was a business at that stage with 5 employees, turning over about 300,000 Australian dollars. It's about 200,000 US dollars, right, back in the day. It was a very small, very, very small operation, right? But there was something I loved about it. So as I was getting close to finishing my university degree, I said, Dad, maybe there's something I could add, a bit of value I could add. I've done marketing, rah, rah, rah. And Dad said, look, I like the idea, Kel, but you've never worked for anybody else first. I want two things. Two rules. I want you to go and work for somebody else first. Get some experience, get some discipline, right? Realize what it's like to go and answer to somebody else that's not your dad, first of all. And wisely, Dad said, look, I don't want us to live and work together. At the time, I was living at home. And he said, we're just going to bring work home and talk about it all the time. He said, I'm not kicking you out of home. I just think while you're living at home, go and work for someone else. So I did for 2 or 3 years, got a marketing cadetship with Panasonic, of all people, which was great. It gave me a fair bit of experience and all that sort of stuff. But after that sort of 3-year time out, I always still kept my hand in the business a little bit, right? I always kept a bit of an eye on what was going on. Funnily enough, at Panasonic, I got some connections to Apple computers. So I bought my first ever Mac because I realized that there was a bit of a job to be done in the design part of the print business, right? So I scraped a few dollars together, bought a Mac LC2, 4 meg of RAM, 40 meg on the hard drive, man. This thing. And it cost us $7,500, and the piece of resistance was the LaserJet 300 to go with it, right? The A4 300 DPI laser printer. But when when you were doing all your forms work, which what Dad was doing on Letraset back in the day, and that sort of stuff, like this was revolutionary, right? And again, through some connections and saying hello to the right sort of people at the right time, I got a demo version of Quark Express. So I taught myself Quark. So even while I was working at Panasonic, Dad would bring some forms, some letterheads home, and I would design it. But a few years later, we came to an agreement. I was moving out of home. We said, now's the perfect time. I left Panasonic and joined the 5-man business, turning over maybe now 350,000 Australian dollars. I thought a little bit like, my life at Panasonic, it was all about spreadsheets and analysing workloads and workflows and things like that. So for the first couple of months, I sat in the office and I was just, tapping away at my my Mac, my very expensive LC2. And sort of it took Dad a little while to actually give me a bit of a shake and a kick up the bum. He said, mate, you're not here to look at spreadsheets and analyse skill sets for 4 employees. You got to get out and generate some business. So he taught me a fair bit about selling print, and that was the start of what was a great journey. Fast forward 25 years, I ended up taking over the business from Dad. He retired. We ended up with 80 staff, thereabouts. Turning over, in our peak, somewhere upwards of 12 or 13 million Australian dollars. We had a very, very strong, because even going back to those original days, a very strong design team. So we had a creative element to the start. We had offset and digital in the middle, the print process. And then we're very, very strong on fulfillment, logistics, warehousing, storefronts, helping customers back end ordering systems, integrating with them. So I always used to think, I'm going off on side track. Bring me back when you need to, buddy. But I'm already 30 seconds. Keep going. I'm already losing the plot here. But I used to love the idea that I thought that it was far easier for me to sell the ancillary services, the graphic design, and we had 7 or 8 designers doing a range of different things, from churn and burn catalog stuff to really quite high-end creative retail stuff. And at the back end, this warehousing, print management, storing for everybody, running campaigns, doing distribution, was at the back end. I always found those 2 services much easier to sell than the print. The interesting thing is both of those things fed the printing presses. Right.
Yeah.
So I was very, very seldom was I ever going out and saying, hey, we print catalogs better than anybody else. I was going out and saying, hey, let us design it for you. Let us store it and distribute it, warehouse it, manage the tail end for you. And oh, by the way, yeah, we can just print it in the middle. So whether it goes on our 5-color Komori or one of our, HP Indigos, depending on the nature of the job, it was always that those bookends sold the middle. Now, the middle was where the margin was back in the day, absolutely. But it gives you a little bit of an idea. We were what we call a half-size shop. We had 2 Komoris and a bunch of Indigos, churning out a lot of typical work, right? Catalogs, brochures, manuals, campaigns, corporate stationery, certificates for all sorts of different customers. We're a real solutions focused provider. And, we had a fabulous time. We ran a great business, and touch wood, I'm happy to say that we were quite profitable for a number of years. We kept things tight. Our mentality was not to borrow a lot of money. So we owned most, if not everything that we had. So it was, if I can describe it this way, and it's one of the things we'll come to, we're a really clean shop. And operate more and more shop. Clean shop gives you the idea that just the floors were clean. No, we're clean operation, simple and clean.
Well, that's really the way it should be run. Period. Any business should be run in a clean way that it's all pretty precise. So a couple of funny things when I started in print. I was doing a couple of things that didn't work, and then my father was like, "Can you get your ass off the couch and go do something instead of sitting around?" I was like, "Yeah, okay." And then went out and got into the print thing and started something, and never wanted to touch a machine, but always wanted to sell. Right. And for me, the beautiful thing about print is, and even today, like, if you got to be smart. No business can run without any type of print. There's some form of print everywhere. Every business is a potential customer, no matter what. And if you don't see that, get out of selling, any print or print related products. And you got to keep it going. We were 120 people, and I'm happy today not to have any. Not that they weren't all good people, but
that extra 40 might have been the difference between you having no hair and me just having a little, hanging on to the little bit that I got left.
Maybe. But yeah, no. So you sound like you have a business like a lot of people have today. Spend a lot of time, a lot of passionate people. Let's only talk about the passionate people, because I don't really care about people in our industry who are not passionate. I don't care what happens to them. But to the passionate people who promote print and do it right, the time sometimes comes to move on. So my first question is, when did you start thinking about actually selling? You're not an old guy, right?
Feel like it.
Well, on the outside, you look good. I don't know about the inside; might be rocking. But
the body is quickly packing up. Buddy, so our story was an interesting one, right? We were never really on the market. We were approached by somebody. So that when you say, when is the first time you thought about selling? When somebody came knocking on our door and said, "Hey, Kel, we like your business. We keep coming up against you in the marketplace. We see you out and about doing these sorts of things. We know you're running a successful need." And look, a business our size is quite small in terms of the US and Canada. In Australia, we sat neatly in that medium. We're a very, very small little country, 25 million people. So
10 million of revenue in any country is a decent sized printing company.
Oh yeah, well, plenty of headaches and grey hair. But enough that we became on the radar of what is Australia's biggest print business, and these were guys that I'd had a relationship with. So we were having to be out at a function one day. We sat next to each other. They were talking about how business was, all that sort of stuff, and they said, "Look, maybe it's time for us to go out and have lunch and have a little bit of a chat." So I thought I was going to, I've got two children, not that I ever really had planned that they would come into the business. They're young adults with their own careers now. But, I wanted a business that they could get involved in if they wanted to. I probably thought I had a business that I was going to retire with or sell much later in life. So when somebody comes along and says this great thing, the thing that you're so passionate about, the thing that, outside of your family and your friends and your faith that you live for and strive for, right? The thing that every square inch of the factory, every employee, and their life story, right? It's home. It was my castle, and I absolutely loved it. We can talk about this later, but part of the success and the growth of the business, I had already purchased in that previous sort of maybe my time with Dad, maybe the 15 years prior, I had purchased 4 other businesses to merge into ours, right? So, we had grown that way. We'd learnt, I'd merged cultures together. I'd been through that whole process. You just become passionate about this to the point where you think, I don't know that I want to sell. So it was really the first thing first was I had to decide if I really wanted to. Now, I understand that a lot of people are at a latter stage in their life. I think there were some statistics thrown around Australia a couple of years ago saying that in the next 10 years, 90% of proprietors want to exit the business that they're in the next 10 years. No big deal there.
Like
the most interesting.
It's probably like that in a lot of places, just because like Generation X and the end of the baby boomers and like a fine bulk. There's a bulk of people, right?
Yeah. The interesting part of that is something like 85% have no clue how they're going to exit their business. They don't have a succession plan. They're hoping that somebody comes along and buys them. I think, honestly, in a lot of people's cases, they're going to, they run their machines down until they're not worth much anymore, and they'll look to have somebody just go and buy their sales book. Fortunately, if they've been around for a little while, they might own the building they're in. And these days, in most places around the world, the real estate's worth far more than the print business itself. So that's their ticket out, or their superannuation, or their retirement fund. But I think it's interesting that there's all these businesses floating around now, and people are going to say, well, look, I've just got to, and it is a bit of counsel that I give people. You've got to then maximise your return today. Just be careful that you're not sowing that much into the future that by the time you get there, you've sacrificed profit along the way that you should really be making now. Make the most out of your business that you can now.
You try. But
that's right.
So question, they were sitting with you, and then however came up, they said to you, were you interested? And then you went, what? Right? And then
exactly.
Did they, when they said, are you interested, did they put a number out at front, or there was no number?
No. Okay. But this is a really interesting point, right? No, they didn't at that early stage. But I was very convinced, and it's probably one of the very key takeaways that I would impress on anybody, is get to an understanding of a deal early on the process. So we did, right? And so I sat down. So that was the introduction. These guys were about number 2 or 3 down.
Sorry, another question, because the questions are coming up. They're going to come up in the order of sequence of doing things. Did you hire a professional to come in and help you once they spoke to you? So you would be an anomaly.
Yeah.
Right?
Look, and I'm not against that. I did. There's a couple of little funny things about it all. And again, we're throwing ideas around left, right, and centre. So maybe just pick the interesting ones out of this. I had an external accountant who I'm very, very close to and still very, very close to. So, I was I didn't hire anybody externally, but I used my own external accountant who had been my personal accountant and the business accountant for many, many years. So he knew us well, and he guided me through. I did hire somebody, not so much to work on the deal, but the practicalities of the best way. So not quite sure about any other places around the world, but you've got this legal entity. Do you sell the whole legal entity, right, with all the share, the shares that go along with the business and all the retained earnings and everything that's all behind, wrapped up in that legal entity? Or in a lot of cases, do you just sell the assets, the name, the machines,
Well, a lot of it depends
the
on the
parts of the
other.
business.
Sorry, a lot of it depends on the
Exactly.
other party, right?
Yes.
But
Yeah.
in you not using an outside source other than your accountant, I'm feeling like it was more of a friendly deal, also.
Remember though, this is the biggest print company in Australia we're talking to, listed on the Australian Stock Exchange,
Oh, okay,
thousand
public.
Oh yeah, that's who we sold to. Yeah,
Okay, so
1,000
that
employees.
money doesn't really mean anything to them because public companies, don't get me wrong, but that's how they do increase their revenue quickly, because organically it doesn't work. And in their mind, there's an extra multiple they pay to have that quickness.
We were acquisition in the last few years. We were acquisition number 23.
And their money's
Right.
lined up, so there's not waiting for the bank to approve their loan.
Yeah.
Like, it's a different ball game right away.
That being said, they're also tough business people, right?
Absolutely.
Who have created a fantastic business from a family business themselves, had created it, listed it on the stock exchange 3 or 4 years earlier. I just want to clarify something. So I did get some external help at other specific areas. Obviously, legal, 100%. Got the lawyers involved at the right time. But I also got a structure. I got an external person involved to help me with some of the structural things. Do I try and sell the legal entity? Do I just sell the assets? How does that mold in with my personal situation? So there was a few people along the way, but in terms of negotiating the sale of the business, I did it all myself.
Cool. So most people don't do that.
Yeah, I get that, and I mean, all of us have been through things where we've tried to maybe, I don't know, sell a house off market, or sell a property, or sell a bit of machinery, or do something that we think is going to be friendly, and we know, why would I pay anybody to help me negotiate that for me, right? And then it's fallen through, and I wished I had have. So I'm certainly not.
You also use outside sources to not have to deal with something after. Because every I is dotted, every T is done, and you're not leaving out something that you don't know.
Sure. So I'm certainly not against using a broker, an agent, or somebody like that to help the deal. This I've got to say was a pretty friendly negotiation. Now, it took 6 months, and I sat with the chairman every second week for an hour and a half, and we'd talk through some stuff. Lots of times. He's a lovely bloke. He so sadly is no longer with us. But he and I would just chat for an hour, and then often we get to go, we haven't talked much about business, right? We talked about our dads, and we talked about print, and we talked about lots of great things we do. And we go, we didn't really get to talking about this deal, or how we're going to handle work in progress, or how we're going to, what date we're going to transition over, or something like that. So it did become quite amicable. Now, that's not to say at the time that there wasn't a few points where we said, buddy, that's not going to work for me, I'm out, right? And again, another thing that I think I was really, really key, and would always be key on, I geared up the deal so that at any time, even up until a week beforehand, we are deep into contracts, we're lawyers left, right, and centre. But at any time, I still could say, guys, if things don't go right, I'm happy to call this whole thing off. Right? So I sort of tried to maintain a little bit of power in all of that. Now, a couple of keys there. I didn't tell I told all but one staff member that I was going through the negotiation. I kept it a complete secret. Yeah. Not easy when you're trying to extract, workflow data and financials and receivables and customer information from your sales reps and all that sort of stuff. It's not easy, but I was really, really committed to that because I didn't want the staff to know that I was negotiating. Everybody gets a bit nervous and edgy, and I've seen this before, right? I've seen it where a company goes through the process of negotiating a sale or a potential sale. It fell over, but a bunch of staff members were brought into the cone of silence, and the cone of silence leaked like a sieve, and all of a sudden the whole company knew that they were negotiating. When it all fell over, everybody's left standing going, well, what's wrong with this? And are we going to just go to the next person? And how secure is my job? So I didn't want anybody to know because if it all fell over, I just wanted life to go back to normal, right? But it was a very powerful negotiating tool, knowing, and they knew that. I said, guys, it's okay. I haven't told anybody. interesting little side issue. I didn't even tell Dad until, like, this is after 6 months of negotiating. I didn't tell Dad, who was now out of the business. I owned it all, but it was his baby from the time that he was 19 years of age.
He'd probably be the worst about going around talking about it.
Well, sadly, and there's a reason for that. Sadly, I could smile on my face, I won't, but I just remember going through the emotional turmoil of this. But sadly, Dad had early onset dementia at that stage. We could see that he didn't quite know who he was telling what to. So if I tried to tell him in confidence, I just probably didn't quite have the I just didn't quite have the confidence that he wouldn't go into the office and say, "Oh, so Kel's negotiating a sale." But one of the key things for me was making sure I was in a position where if it all fell over and I wasn't happy with one aspect of the deal, I could go, "Guys, it's been really, really nice. Let's continue the relationship, but at this stage, I'm not going to sell." But as it turned out, that didn't happen. Things did go pretty well. We had some hiccups along the way in terms of just negotiating bits and pieces. And that's not to say that in the final month or so, when we're sitting around a boardroom in the big inner city office with my lawyer and accountant and, their team of people, that there weren't some things where we said, "Guys, we need to just go and have 10 or 15 minutes or, in another room and see if this suits us."
You do that even if there's nothing.
I know. Yeah. We're just sitting there going, "How long do we sit around here for a little minute and tell them that we're talking?"
Keep everybody. So sounds like a friendly deal. I'm gonna say that for people listening, most people, these deals don't go down like that. There's someone who might be interested, and then they reach out to you. You would probably find somebody, if you're not well versed, to help you. But it sounds to me like you got really lucky in the sense that they came to you. From talking to people who sell their businesses and are planning, different ball game. If you're planning to sell your business, your house has to be in order before you even get ready to put it out there. So
look, 100%. I mentioned that these guys were the 23rd, or we were the 23rd acquisition that these guys had made over the last couple of years. We apparently were the most efficient. Right. And that, I don't say that with any sort of boasting, but I think one of the key things is always be ready. Right. I ran the business every day as though I could have, got up and walked away, or I could have sold within a week. I could have, done any. So, the concept of them giving you a request for information, right, where they say, "Tell us about your top 10 customers, tell us about your receiver, tell us about this." There's 25 different categories of stuff they tell you, right? I was able to turn that information around. I actually could have done it quicker than a week, but I gave it to them in a week. They said, "This is unbelievable. People normally wait 2 or 3 months to give us this." So I think at any given time, and I think, as you just mentioned it before, right, it's a business discipline. If you're not doing it, you should be doing it. You should have all your ducks in a row, right? You should, I used to pride myself on the fact that I would have my own little financial report, and it was generated by me. It was in Excel, and I'd pull out of the financial reports at the end of any given month, and it would give me the snapshot of the business. And I was petrified. And touch wood, we never really had bad months, right? We never lost money. If we ever come close to breaking even, I'd nearly have a heart attack and start to tell the reps they had to get out and work harder and be smarter and go and beg customers for work and all that sort of stuff, right? But my little call it a cheat sheet or a survival sheet would just tell me how sales were tracking, how much I had in the bank. Ultimately, it was very simple. It was, how much do I have in the bank? How much do people owe me? How much do I owe people?
That's
including my staff. Now, right. I know you can sift through balance sheets and P&Ls and all that sort of stuff. I wanted it in, could have, how some of my reps were performing. That probably blew it out from, so we talk about paper over here being A4, right? That's A4, right? I probably could have done it on half an A4 and A5 piece of paper. The things that I thought that at the very bottom line was, this is my position. If I had to pull down the shutters tomorrow, right? If anything happened to me, anything happened to a family member or, whatever, if I had to pull down the shutters, that's where I was at. And so the information, the discipline around that meant that when somebody came knocking on my door, I was ready to go. right? I had it all prepared.
95% of the people out there are not so disciplined. And they're not going to become, and unfortunately, they're not going to become disciplined because if they're thinking of selling their business, they're probably on the higher end of the age scale, and you're not teaching them new tricks, right? But in talking to other people and people who broker the deals, if you're thinking of selling your business, you got to think a year out of getting it ready, because if your business is not clean, if your software is not in order, if your machines aren't in order, your debt, etc., you're just devaluing the offer that you're going to get. Like, there's no secrets, right? You got to be good.
100%. But honestly, I would do all of this sort of stuff whether I was planning on selling the business or not.
Right. But again, that's you from the day you started in uni doing the things you work, because it's inbred in you to do it that way.
Well, can I say it's never too late, right? It's never too late to start.
Yeah,
right?
That's like real nice and philosophical and full of shit, but the average person is not changing the way they do things 20 years into their job.
Sure. Well,
right?
Well, I don't mean to be tough, because I want to think the best of everybody, right?
No, I gave up on that shit. Facts are facts.
But this is where you lose control of the negotiation process. Right. And if you think you're going to go into a negotiation process, whether it's a friendly or not, right, with a mess, with stuff in a mess, with not understanding your client but your customer base, not understanding where they are, not understanding whether there's opportunity there for you to grow with them. I used to do things with my customers called customer care plans. We sit down with them every 6 months, the key ones, and say, how are you going? What can we do better? What aren't we doing good enough? How can we work with you on all this sort of stuff?
But that's why you're in the top 10% of printing companies, because you do it. The others, the reality is, yes, it's easy. Yes, you can, but they're not going to. So if you're not going to, then you have to be set up properly. You need your external auditor to come in and advise you on what they've done with others in the process that you need, because you can't speak to potential buyers, whether they're offering to you or you want to go to them, if your house is not clean in order. Period.
Sure.
Right.
Well, I can only give you what my experience and advice was, and that is get your house in order, because that's gonna.
By the way, if you could run it daily and have it in order, you're going to save $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 less on your accounting fees or legal fees, right? So there's many reasons why you should have your house in order.
And can I say that when the deal comes to the deal, right, you're going to get an extra 10, 20, 30, 40%, because, when you're sitting down and Mr. Potential Purchaser, and we've said there's a lot of companies out on the market there, right? Lots of people want to get out, right? So when Mr. Purchaser comes along and he says, well, here's a company that've got everything's a mess. It's a dumpster truck mess there, right? As opposed to, hey, look at this guy. He's got everything in order. He understands his customer, understands his suppliers. He's got contracts in place. He's got all of this sort of stuff. Who do you think somebody's going to want to go and be attracted to? So
why do people stage their homes for home sales? Right? Same thing. It's a staging. So, let's go to money for a minute. I'm not going to ask you how many millions you got, if they were shares or cash or any of that, but you could tell us if you want. But no. When it came time to the evaluation and determining the value, whether you did it or someone else did it, were you doing a multiple of EBITDA? Were you doing an asset sale? Most people like asset sales because they don't want any of the liabilities that come with the previous business of so many, depending on how many years it's been running, right? There's the share sale, the earnout. What do you?
So we all know there's 100 different ways to skin the cat, right? And again, I got both sides. I remember I bought 4 businesses, right? So those 4 businesses I bought were all asset sales. I wasn't interested in taking in somebody's, historical, financial dealings, right? And finding any skeletons in the closet and all that sort of stuff, right? So we just look purely at asset sale. I just love the EBITDA, multiplier. I think one of the key things, right, in every transaction that I've had, it's always been, we have to create a win-win, right? As in, there are a lot of companies these days that we know of around the place that might be doing it a bit tough, might be in some degree of distress. I was never interested in a distressed company. They were distressed for a reason, right? And if the customers weren't bailing out at that point, they were going to bail out pretty quickly. If the staff weren't disengaged, at that point, they were going to be pretty disengaged when they said, "Oh, we're selling out, and you've got to go and join this company." So I was never interested in the scavenger, sale or purchase, right? Where the vultures all are circling around the carcass of a business that is not doing so good. I really only ever wanted to talk to businesses that, again, a little like mine, we're not, at least had a bunch of their operation in order, at least had a bunch of happy customers and engaged staff, and I thought that I could really work with that, right? So I always wanted it to be a win-win. So coming to the deal, we always have to create something that is attractive to me. It's got to be a win for me. I've got to feel like I'm getting a deal here. And we all know that if I can go and find a company that's paying rent and paying electricity and paying power, and it's got 30 staff and I only need 15 of them, by incorporating them into my business, I take away all of those costs, right? And so 3 or 4 times.
Anyways.
Three or four times multiplier.
How fast can you pay back the purchase?
A 3 or 4 times multiplier actually becomes a 1 or 2 times multiplier, right? And I always looked at a deal where I was purchasing, not just a bit of equipment that I might have had and I was strengthening, or not just a bunch of customers. I always wanted it to be a little bit better than we had. I wanted it to add significant value. I wanted it to, a product, a project, a piece of equipment that allowed us to go into a new market, for example. And there was one of the big purchases that we made, probably the biggest one that I made, was a company about the same size as us. Funnily enough, I'd always talk to them down the track about selling to, about them buying us. But a few years later, things completely turned and they rang and said, "Kel, actually, I think, we're on the market now. You'd be perfect to take us out." And I did. But that was a classic where back then it was, business of this size, buying a business of the same size, but together. And I'd missed a couple of tenders that a year later I was able to go back and say, look at us now, right? We've added all of this value. We've added this capability. And so we were able to attack new markets. So that was very much a situation where 1 + 1 equaled much more than 2, right? So let's get back to the deal. It's got to be win-win, right? I was just a fan of EBITDA, but there is percentage of sales plus some sort of equipment thing. Remembering too that as an asset sale, I wouldn't necessarily take all of the assets, right? You can then cherry pick what you want and what you don't want. You say, "Listen, mister, that's great, but you can go and take all this stuff that we don't want, go and sell it in eBay or Facebook Marketplace or whatever you want." In fact, we talk about HP Indigo. That particular purchase had an ePrint 1000, one of the first ever Indigos. And I'm so disappointed. I sold it, I remember, for $5,000 to a guy who came and picked it up on his on a trailer behind his car. And I'm so disappointed. For $5,000, I've seen people gut them and make a bar. And I would have loved, and it would have been a fantastic little historical piece, given my love of HP Indigo, right, and all things D-Scoop. I would have loved to have kept that machine, right? But it was that stuff that you don't want. You get rid of it. You cherry pick the things out of it. So yes, you get a valuation, but often you're picking up machinery for much less than market value. You're picking up the customers that hopefully you're going to sow into your business and add. So valuation for me, it was a multiplier of EBITDA. These guys were very, very much on that. They understood that mentality. I understood that mentality. Fortunately, I was profitable, right? And EBITDA doesn't work if you're not making any money. So, get a 5 times multiplier, 5 times nothing, still nothing, right? So when you're going into a deal, you have to determine where your value is, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Is your value in something special you do that they are going to gain a competitive advantage out of? Because you might not be making a lot of money out of it, but by the time they roll it into their business, they have got the opportunity to make some money. So
that's why I say when you got a big public company coming at you, it's a different ball game. First of all, if they're coming at you, there's something they want. So right away, you know, because they don't need a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
So you know, and really at the end of the day, you just got to play it the best way you can. But you can probably figure out sooner than later with a bigger company what their reasoning is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And if they really want it, I think sometimes they kind of let you know. So.
And you got to when you think about it, right? At that stage, they were turning over $600 million. We're turning over 12. Like, really, are we that valuable? But
they write the check from their checking account. They don't go anywhere. We do
yeah,
an acquisition. We're doing the pre-arranging at the bank to make sure that the money's there when the check is sent. It's a
sure.
different.
Sure. But then it
So
it
I
goes
remember
to this
an
point.
acquisition, a small one. Maybe it was $500,000 for a $3 million 40-inch offset shop. The people that owned it wanted out. They had a 2-color Heidelberg at the time, which I turned around and sold for a good part of what I paid.
Yeah,
They were
exactly.
people that wanted out weren't thinking about anything. I sold scales, hand things, anything, and it's like a garage sale almost.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. Just to get to the nuts and bolts, and we won't talk numbers, but it wasn't an EBITDA sale. I did sell, my those advisors I told you about. I did sell the whole proprietary limited entity. That got me into 7 years of warranties, right? But that was fine. I was happy because I knew there were no skeletons in the closet, because I knew our business was super clean. Right. I was totally comfortable, and there was not an issue at all. In fact, one of the directors and one of the family members of the business plays golf at the golf club where I play, and I saw him maybe 6 or 12 months ago. We see each other on Wednesday. We just pass each other. And I said, buddy, do you know yesterday was 7 years since we sold out to you, and my warranties are all over? And he goes, well, I'll buy you a beer afterwards and we'll celebrate and think. But never heard, I worked with them for a number of years afterwards.
7 years of warranties? Is that like an Australian thing?
Yeah, typically. Yeah, that's look, it's more so when they're buying the whole proprietary, we call it a proprietary limited, the legal entity. They just want to make sure that that 7 years is a common legal time frame that I would warrant that nothing is going to come out of the woodwork, and if it does, well, it's on me.
Well, then come back and try and get it if you have it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So okay, you do the deal. All that stuff is good. So now you've agreed to do the deal. You got to go into the shop. How are you doing all that?
Pretty tough day, that one.
I could only imagine.
Pretty tough day. So of all the staff that we had, they were like family, right? I'll talk about, loving staff and how important they were. And there was a couple of really critical employees who really treated the business like it was their own. No secret that, out of all the staff we had, they didn't want to take all of them. So I had to look people in the face and say, I'm really sorry, but this is going to mean a bunch of you who have put heart and soul, who we've had a relationship, some of them for 20 years. I'm really sorry, there's not going to be a job for you under this new arrangement. And interestingly, just the way it all panned out, it was pretty quick, right? So, from the time I told them, so there is the concept of exchange, right? You sign the contracts, but we don't settle for another month, right? So there's this period where you're legally bound, but the transaction hasn't happened. For a number of different reasons, little delays and things, those two things kept getting closer and closer and closer until literally we signed and exchanged and settled on simultaneously. I remember that day. It was 4:00 in the afternoon, and I literally had to call a meeting for the staff the next day and say, "You've come to work, but I no longer own it as of 16 hours ago, right?" We were juggling a little bit of office staff and production staff and staff working in other warehouses because we just wanted to honour people by telling them all together. But yeah, it was a tough one. And look, invariably, most of the people would, most of the people were thankful for the ride that they'd had. They loved the place. I'm still in contact with lots of them now. They still loved what we had created. So a bunch of them came over. We created New World for a period of time in that new business. The ones we had to say farewell to, I could only do what I know best, and that was to be honest and pay them all their entitlements. And it cost me a lot of money that day to pay out people that redundancies.
And that's factored in.
The redundancies were on me. And by the way, I because of position in the market, I was able to go and recommend a whole bunch of them. I think. Invariably anybody that wanted a job, I was able to help go and get a job elsewhere. So it was a really, really big critical part. But the fact that on that day, I had to say goodbye to all my staff, and I knew that as I walked into that business, I didn't own any. I didn't own that computer anymore. I didn't own that press anymore. I didn't own, that pallet of paper. It was a really, really weird feeling, right? And I know one of your questions, Warren,
in the bank.
how do you feel, right? And it was a little bizarre. It was a little out of body. And yes, I can always say, well, it's provided a bit of a future for the family and all that sort of stuff, which is nice. But that doesn't take away from this heart and soul that you have sown into this place, right? I painted the factory and the. Sorry.
For how many years? Like, that's right. It's all of a sudden, what do you do?
And what had happened? So what the company, that their policy was that they take all the staff and they take the staff that they want and they take the customers, but it is their policy that they that they pay you for the machinery, but they then go and sell it elsewhere, right? Overseas, anything that they want, they will transition. But the majority of the machinery, like the half-size Kamoris, which are great machines, but they were a full-size shop. They didn't want half-size presses.
They run a half-size.
They would not sell them into the Australian market, right? They would have to sell them overseas, India, China, Indonesia, that sort of stuff. So they wanted to get their money back pretty quick. So within 24 hours, the engineers have moved into my factory and pulling it apart. Now, this is a factory where, we'd been in for the last sort of 8 years or something. You know what it's like. Every position of that machine, you've planned out within a millimetre where, the flow of paper and the forklifts and everything is. I know where to go to get, the ink storage is all beautifully, laid up. And to go out there within 24 or 48 hours, and it was like a bomb had hit it, and all these strangers coming in, touching this stuff that I had, worked my bum off and been so intimately involved in to be part of. And it was just like pulled apart. And that was probably the one moment where, I stopped and the heart fluttered a little bit, and there might have been a bit of a tear, right? But you get this sense of that it was the right time, right? You'd been through 6 months, you'd planned it, you'd spoken to your wife, you'd spoken to the accountant, you'd analysed everything within an inch of its life. You'd come to that decision. You just had to be true and honest to that decision and say, it's the right thing to do, right? Time moves on. We're not all going to be around forever. We're not all going to have our printing presses forever. We're not all going to have the same sort of work. Or interestingly, we're not always going to have our same customers forever. Customers will go, right?
Sooner than you think.
Sooner than you think, sadly, for whatever reason, right? And we had customers for 40 years who sadly had to tell us one day that they were purchased by Unilever, and Unilever had a global procurement policy, and that didn't include us, sadly.
It's real life every day, right?
That's right.
Did you stay on after you sold?
Yeah, stayed on for a period of time.
How long?
There's one thing. So this is an interesting point, right? We talked a little bit before about the deal. A big part of deals these days is an earn-out, right? Part of the deal is linked to how much work you're going to get over the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months or whatever. To be honest, and I don't mind saying, I was anti an earn-out, right? Those 6 months of negotiation, I simply had to say, listen, if you don't trust me to bring it over that $10 million or $12 million worth of work, right, then don't worry about the deal. Okay, but I'm not going to be caught up in a situation where if this customer doesn't come, it hits my back pocket. Now, that's much easier to say than it is to have happen, because most people, and I did it when I was buying other businesses, right? Most purchasers will want some guarantee that you're going to bring that work across. I wasn't a fan. I was fortunate enough that we cut a deal that it didn't have an earn-out. Maybe that cost me a little bit of money in the negotiation, but sometimes price matters a little bit less than certainty.
Hey, everybody has a threshold level that they could live with, and I think you accordingly have to go by it.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. Interestingly, when I went across there, right, you're talking about a company, that we had that was dynamic, that was nimble. We could get work happening. We had, machines and production staff to be able to jump around and do things, and I could keep customers happy. You then go to this massive conglomerate, turning over $600-700 million, right? And all of a sudden, I can't get a job in quickly. right? I had a warehouse and I used to be able to deliver Sydney, Canberra is about a 3 hour, it's an overnight freight, So if a customer was ordering something online out of our warehouse, by midday, I knew they'd have it there at 8 o'clock the next morning, and that'd be terrific. The very first order we did like that at the new company took 8 days to get down there. The customer rings me up and says, Kel, you said this was going to be a good deal. Now I've got to wait 8 days for my envelopes or my letterheads or my brochures to arrive. What the heck's going on? I did keep, I honoured, I really only lost one customer, smallish customer, who said, look, I just don't like, being part of a bigger conglomerate. Well, I like the family business style. I said that totally understand. That's fine.
Makes sense.
But I delivered 99% of the sales that I'd committed to across to the new business. However, I have seen more recently in some companies I work with where things don't go so well at an earnout because you've got no great guarantee that the service level that you were providing in your little business, when you sell out and you go to someone else, that they're going to maintain that same level of service or the same level of pricing necessarily or whatever. So you've hitched your whole deal on the fact that I'm going to maintain all these customers. You get over there and you realise, wait there, they now take 6 days to produce the work that I was producing in 3 days. My customer's not going to hang around if they've got to wait 6 days to get their work. And you get over there and you go, well, this is the point. My warning is just be careful about understanding the nature of the deal when you're going into deals where there's an earn-out component.
Well, I was going to say, I think of this whole conversation, that could be one of the more valuable points, right? I haven't thought about that every time I hear earn-out. And the idea that your earn-out is based on how they're going to serve the customer their way, nobody should be responsible for something they can't control.
100%.
Or you've got a deal in place that it's a percentage of something because they acknowledge that they're not giving the same service you gave when you were delivering. Wow.
Yeah.
That's the golden nugget on earn-out.
Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to be Mr. Negative Nelly. There are some times when it could. Sometimes it could be better.
What?
There's sometimes when it could be better. I go over to a new company, and what I was doing in 6 days, they can now do in 3 days. All of a sudden, my customer loves me. I'm getting more work, and I can actually increase my earn-out. There's a positive. There's an upside to it.
You know what? You're not selling to increase your earn-out. You want to make sure you just maintain that earn-out.
Just get it. Yeah.
The upside's irrelevant. It's how do you protect the downside, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's the nugget.
Both.
You do that. That's great. Well, let me ask one question here. What's the biggest mistake you made in the process? You could say none if you don't want everyone to laugh, but
look, I think I'm still friends with a bunch of people in that business. So this sort of comes back perhaps a little bit to your other question. How long did I last there? I didn't have an earn-out, but we did have a payment plan, if you like. So it was important that I stay there for a year. Just to make sure everything went smoothly until I got all my money, and then
you're getting so it's fine.
I could have stayed, or I transitioned everything across. It was pretty clean, swift, clinical, neat. Things didn't always go the way we want, but the fact that I was on the inside helped me look after customers and change. And I did change some processes there, right? I did get quotes turned around, even though they're a big company. Their SLA was to turn around a quote in 48 hours. I got them to exactly. I said, man, I nearly got that job printed by the time you've got the quote done, right? So I was able to bring some change there. Probably my biggest regret, the biggest thing I didn't do was if I considered some sort of career in life after I sold the business, I probably, it was just, hey, Kel, come and work, come and transition. We'll find a spot for you in the business later. Let's figure that all out when you come there. As it turned out, a year later, I probably didn't like the way things were going and perhaps aspects of the way I was treated. So, we called it quits after a year, and I went off and I've been happy doing the other things I do within the industry and the other opportunities that I've had within the industry outside of necessarily working for them. So I think the biggest thing was understanding my role in the long-term play of that business rather than just transitioning the business.
I think most owners don't last too long regardless. right? It's not yours. You got to report to somebody. It was yours forever, and now it's not. And now you got this money in the bank, and what are you even putting up with it for? The majority, I think. And I think a lot of times the companies don't want you either because they don't need you. What do you call it?
Yeah.
They don't need you disrupting their way of life.
All my, a bunch of my buddies said, "Kel, you're not going to last long working for anybody else, right? You you work for yourself, you control things, you make the decisions. You love that. We were talking before about the dynamic nature of having your finger in everybody's pie. Sales over here, a bit of production stuff over here, a bit of new business, all that sort of stuff. When when you don't have that control, when you stop getting invited to the important meetings, when people are potentially a little bit threatened,
you're not who you were
by your performance. You don't, I can't go down and mentor or motivate people in the same way that I used to. I can't go and give them a pay rise if I think that they did something particularly special.
You're basically a once was.
Yeah. I was made very quickly a has-been.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. Wow. Anyways, so there's a lot for people to know if you want to sell your business. I got a little golden retriever here who's all over me. That's why I'm moving around.
Sure.
Stick your head up.
Look, I think hopefully some of the things we've discussed have been helpful. That whole discipline of whether or not you're going to sell your business, you're interested in selling your business, or you're just going to keep going day to day. The discipline of running a clean operation, I cannot stress enough.
Listen, right? Clean operation, knowing your numbers, knowing your, surrounding yourself with the right people. If you know you're not good at something, you just don't want to minimize it not being right, because everything that's seen will equal big deductions for the final number. And you're already going in thinking you're worth more than you are.
Yeah.
Because manpower and the hours you put in building don't count. And the word goodwill doesn't exist anymore.
It doesn't, but I think where the biggest value is, right, and there's no secret, what are people going to buy these days? They're not interested in buying your Heidelberg or your Komori or your Indigo. They're interested in buying your customers. So know your numbers. More important, or as importantly, know your customers, right? I can't stress enough. And the further perhaps you climb up a corporate ladder into into vice president role, or president role, owner, whatever stage you're at, right? That keeping close to your customers and knowing your customers and where they're at is so vital.
That has nothing to do with buying or selling. That's what you should be doing every day with your business from the beginning. And if you're an owner, you better make sure you're out there with your salespeople, meeting the customers, because when the salesperson leaves, you don't want to be stuck. I mean, that's just printing 101. I can't take it anymore than how many people I know that don't think like that and don't do that. But we're not going to get upset today because it was a really good episode. I think it's a really important one. Another thing is, if you're thinking of selling your business, don't go buy $1 million to $3 million of new equipment a year or two before. Suck it up and roll with it, because that money's coming right off your bottom line if they're responsible, right?
Go outsource. We became experts, and my policy was always create this lovely little environment that we had, fill it with the work that we wanted to fill it with, keep getting the sales, but just outsource it to somebody else, have a bit of a strategic relationship with somebody else. And again, when people come along, right, and interestingly, some of those purchases that we had made earlier were companies where we had been outsourcing all the work. We became their biggest customer. It was an easy takeover at that point, right, where we became their biggest customer. And we go, well, buddy, if you're interested in getting out, because, if I happen to go and put in another machine, I take all my work back. Why don't I just take you out, take some of your customers and that equipment with me? And it was an easy one.
That's how I got into large format. I was outsourcing in the beginning to one company. All of our work wasn't all that much, but at one point I figured out, or somebody slipped and said that we were half of the business. And then I just used that as an opportunity to call them up, go have lunch and say, listen,
exactly.
Just putting it out there that if you don't want to do it, I'm getting the equipment.
But then, go full circle to the people that might look to buy you out. When you turn around and go, look, I've got a factory full of all of this sort of work that I'm doing reasonably profitably and well and nice, but I also send out $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 million. They turn around and say, oh, wait there, we can take that $5 million in-house. We eat up. It's like a double win, right? Because not only do they then get the profit that you've made selling to the customer, but they get the profit that you were paying to your outside supplier who's adding his margin to it. So You know, that's to your point. Don't go buying new equipment. Be smarter with what you've got, and if you haven't got the right sort of gear, find someone else who has and outsource it to them.
Because the people buying you probably have more equipment than they know what to do with already.
That's it. They're just looking to fill it.
Yeah, wow. Anyways, wow, good episode. That one went the distance, and I think there's a lot of people that are in that stage. So any conversation about selling is a good conversation. If everybody picks up 1 or 2 points, because you don't have to pick them all up, that'll help you, along the way. The way your deal was done, anybody listening, chances are it's not happening that way.
Sure.
Right? But if it does, you can give Kelvin a call and he'll guide you through it. If anybody else wants to have a conversation, has some questions, wants to know, not sure, feel free, give me a call. Happy to chat.
Both, mate. I think you and I are cut from the same cloth, right? We just love this sort of stuff and love helping people who maybe don't see it either the same way. We've had the ability to go through it and be through it. Now sit back and look at it from back here, right? We're not in the trenches anymore, so we sort of look at things with a different level of clarity and expertise. So I'd be delighted from my point of view if anybody felt like they wanted just to reach out sometime, give me a shout. If I can add, there's a million other parts to this story that we haven't got time to do here, but if you want to reach out, I'd be delighted to talk to anybody.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
no, we are exactly the same. And, at the end of the day, I mean, I'm more about people, and I want to see people succeed in the best way
100%.
possible. Unfortunately, I can't help everybody because I don't want to be helped. But anyways, leaving that aside, thanks so much for coming on and just being so open about everything except what you sold it for. But that's okay. We understand. Not everybody does, and nor should you have to talk about the number. But do appreciate you coming on, sharing the advice.
I just don't want to talk about the number in case my wife finds out.
Oh no, that's why I didn't push it. I understand that.
Hey, buddy, it's been a pleasure. I love what you do. I love the passion you have for the industry. So if this was some sort of little bit of a help, it's been my pleasure. Appreciate it, and I hope anybody that happens to stumble across this down the track finds it helpful as well.
Cool. Yes, thank you. So anybody wants to come on the show, let me know. Anybody wants to know more about something, you have an idea for a topic, let me know. Be happy to look for it. Otherwise, I appreciate you, and I appreciate you listening and sharing everything that I do. Final word, www.theprintwhisperer.shop. Go buy some t-shirts, go buy some hoodies, make some people in your house happy, in your office, friends. They make great gifts, great conversation pieces, and we're going to leave it at that. Until next time. Cheers.